Hey guys, this is Mr. Blosser, and here we're going to be talking about completing the square. So, come along with me. So far you know two ways to solve quadratic equations. We know factoring as a method, and we also know the quadratic formula. You've also seen some particular squares written in this form here called perfect square. And these you've solved by rewriting or looking inside. Well, today we're going to merge these two methods into one more technique called completing the square, which sounds awful and exciting. Here's the steps for solving an equation by completing the square. And first I'll outline the steps and then we'll do some examples, okay? The first step that you want to take when you have an equation that looks like this is to move the constant c to the other side. So this constant here, we want to flip it over where the 0 is and make it negative c. And then we want to add this here number to both sides. Okay, so we want to add, so what is this? Well, so this is half of the b. So this is the b here. So you want to take half of that and then square that number. And I'll show you how to do that. That's going to mean that we're going to be able to factor the left side as a perfect square. And on the right side, we'll have some simplifying to do as well. And then we'll be able to solve the quadratic by undoing. So let's take a look. Example 1. Here we have x squared plus 4x plus 3 equals 0. So our first step is to move the 3. So here's my checklist on the side here. And so let me move the 3 to the other side. Okay, so I just subtracted 3 over here because that helps me to visualize what I need to do to make a square. And in fact, let me make some space here because I'm going to want to add something to both sides. Okay, and so that's why I make these little marks here, is to show that I'm going to add the same number to both sides of this equation. So what is that number? So here's a little visualization to help you. So there's my x squared box, my tile, and my 4x's. To make this into a square, I'm going to want to split them up evenly. So 2 to the side and 2 below, like that. That way I make a square shape. And now we can start to see how many ones we would need to complete this square, right? So you see here that the space here is going to need to be filled up with ones. So how many ones do we need here? That's right, we need 4 ones. Okay, there they are. So how do we get that? How do we get that we need to add 4 ones to make this into a square? Well, the formula over here says to take b, and so here's b, right? So b here is 4. And so what I need to do is take half of that, so half of b, which is 2. And then I need to square that. So I need to square the 2, which gives me 4. Okay, so in other words, I had 4 x's. I put 2 here and 2 here, so that's 2. But then 2 squared gives me the 4 ones. So what does this accomplish? Well, that means that x squared plus 4x plus 4, right? So that's what this is really a square. And what square is it? It's x plus 2 squared. Okay, it's a square that's x plus 2 by x plus 2. And over here, the negative 3 plus 4 makes 1. So we added the number that completed the square to both sides. And now we've even factored and simplified. All that's left to do now is to solve this equation by undoing. So if x plus 2 squared equals 1, what does x plus 2 equal? Well, it equals plus or minus 1. So I square rooted both sides, and remember that gives me that plus or minus If I flip the 2 over to get -2 plus or minus 1, and then that can give me my two answers. -2 plus 1 is -1, and -2 minus 1 is -3. That's it. I've completed my steps and I've got my solution. The next one will be faster, you'll see. Alright, so x squared plus 6x plus 7. Let's move c to the other side, and in the same breath, I'm also making room for me to complete the square. For visualization, here's a little preview. There's my x squared. My 6x's, I need to split them up into 3 and 3, which means I need how many ones? That's right, I need 9 ones. So I'm going to add 9 to both sides. That means that this square is actually an x plus 3 times x plus 3 squared. And -7 plus 9 is 2. Now I square root both sides. Oh, your checklist. So I've done this and I've done this. Now I square root both sides. So x plus 3 equals plus or minus. So 2 is not a number that is easily square rootable, at least not without getting a decimal, right? So this would be about 1.4. And instead of writing 1.4, we're just going to leave that as the square root of 2. That way we don't have to round it. To finish the problem, right, so we're undoing, just flip the 3 over. So -3 plus or minus the square root of 2. And you're done. If you really wanted to, you could separate this into 2 different solutions. Right, so each of these would give me a decimal approximation. But you know what? This is good enough right here. If you get to this point, you're done. So what are things that can make this a little bit trickier? Well, you guessed it. Having an odd number there makes it kind of an odd problem. Notice that I move my 4 to the other side. Check. And what number completes the square here? Well, if I try and visualize this, there's my x squared. But how do I split my 5x's evenly? I mean, I can put 2 and 2 there as 4, but there's an extra one left over. I suppose that you could think of it as having a half of an x here and a half of an x here. But even when you start to try and count how many ones would fill in here, that's not really a clean number, right? I mean, it looks like there's 4 whole ones, but then it's kind of hard to tell how many others are going to fit in here. No worries though, we have a formula. So the formula tells us that we just split the 5 in half and square it. So so you can do it either way. You can do 5 divided by 2 is 2.5, and then 2.5 squared ends up being 6.25. Okay, and it's okay that it's a decimal, no problem. That's the number that you'll add to both sides. So how does this factor then? Well, the main thing here is that we are splitting these x's into 2 equal parts. So half of 5 is going to be 2.5. There's going to be 2.5 x's on either side. So that's the square, as x plus 2.5. So this is always half. Okay, and if you're worried about, well, what about this decimal here? You know what? We picked this. This number comes from this calculation specifically for it to work out nicely. And so you don't even have to worry about it. Over here, you do have to add the -4 and the 6.25. And so we get this number here. And now we're ready to move on. So now that we've added the right number to both sides and we've factored, we're ready to solve. So square root both sides to cancel the square. So you get x plus 2.5 equals, don't forget your plus or minus, and use your calculator to square root 2.25. You get 1.5. Last step, if you flip the 2.5 over, you get negative 2.5 plus or minus 1.5. And here, if you do the plus and the minus, you actually get nice numbers, right? Negative 2.5 plus 1.5 is the -1, and negative 2.5 minus 1.5 is -4. All right, last example. And this one is as nasty as they can be. There's something that's different about this one that you might notice. And that is, that's right, there is a 2 in front. What does that mean? That means there are 2x squareds. But if there's 2x squareds, that's going to be harder to make this into a square. So I'm going to add one more step to our step-by-step process. Can you guess it? We're going to divide everything by 2. Okay, so we're going to divide this by 2, divide this by 2, divide this by 2, divide this by 2, all of them by 2. That means that we no longer have a 2x squared, just a 1x squared. And that's kind of what we wanted. Unfortunately, when we divided 7 by 2, we got 3.5. Good gag, right? Well, don't worry. If we follow our steps, we'll be okay, even if we get decimals. So, following our step-by-step process here, our next step is to move c to the other side. So flip my 3 over, and I'm ready to complete the square. So what number completes the square? Well, so let's do our work here. So the b is the 3.5, and I need to divide that in half and then square it. So half of 3.5 is what? 1.75? Yep, use your calculator. And if I square 1.75, I get that. 3.0625 gag. Okay, no worries. Now that we've done this, we're ready to factor. The parentheses here that we're going to get on the left side, it's going to have an x, right? And it's going to have half of this. Okay, you say, does that always happen like that? Yup, that's the way we chose it to work out. Oh, I love it when it works out. Half of 3.5 is 1.75. Okay, even though we can't draw or visualize this square, the calculations are going to make sure that it works out. On the right side, we add those two together, we get this decimal. And so we've factored, and now we just have to solve. So we're going to square root both sides. And again, use your calculator on the right to get 0.25. Don't forget the plus or minus. And finish by subtracting over. And again, here we can simplify these two answers using the plus. We get negative 1.5, and using the minus, we get negative 2. Hey, well, congratulations, you made it to the end of the video on completing the square. Hopefully this gave you some examples of the strategies, and make sure that you make a note of your questions and come to class tomorrow ready to practice. Goodbye.